All right, well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Collin Man's Answer Show. This is episode 62. Today, my guest is Teach the Geek. His name is Neil. Without further ado, introduce yourself, say what you do, who you are, things like that, man.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And as you mentioned, I have a business called Teach the Geek where I work with engineers and scientists, essentially people that work in the STEM fields, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, on their public speaking skills. And the motivation for that whole business came from my own struggles working as an engineer in the medical device industry and having to give presentations every month in front of senior management, and I wasn't very good at it. And I noticed a whole lot of other engineers weren't all that much better at it than I was. And I think the main reason that we weren't all that proficient at it is that we have all this technical expertise, but we weren't the best at distilling it in such a way that non-technical people could understand. And as I mentioned, I was talking in front of senior management. So these are VP of sales, CEO, COO, and necessarily technical people. And so when I got a lot better at that, I basically took everything that I learned and I turned it into a course called Teach the Geek to Speak. So that's one of the things that I work on. I also have a children's book, and it's called Ask Uncle Neil Why Is My Hair Curly? It's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is, and I use science to answer the question. And the motivation for me writing that book was to get more kids involved or encourage more children to consider careers in STEM, since the STEM economy is certainly the future. Innovation is the future, and there's no reason why any child should believe that they can't be a part of it. And then the last thing that I do is I'm a patent agent. I became one, let's see, in 2012, so that's 9 years ago now. I became one because my boss at the time wanted me, and he wanted all the engineers at the company. It was a small company, so it was only three of us, including myself, to become patent agents, so he wouldn't have to outsource patent drafting to outside counsel like he had been. So I took the test and passed it, and then he still outsourced all the patent drafting to outside counsel. So for a number of years, I wasn't really doing much with my with my being a patent agent. A couple of years ago, well, a few years ago, I decided to just go off on my own and do it freelance, just for any individual inventors that could find me and would care to have me write their patent applications. But a couple of years ago, 2019, I started working with a firm here in San Diego where I live. It was virtual the entire time, even pre-COVID. So it was always us meeting virtually and working with our clients virtually. But essentially, I work with the firm with drafting patent applications and responding to correspondence from the patent office. So those are pretty much the three things I do: Teach the Geek, my children's book, and being a patent agent.
It seems to me that you have a busy schedule, man. But going back to something you said about teaching or Teach the Geek, that's something I've learned too, and that I feel like you could elaborate on this a little more. It's that it's speaking, especially in senses like that. It's and even writing to an extent. It's all about conveying to the audience as a layperson or a normal person would think through intelligent speak. So like because if you're really thinking about it, like when you're talking about a subject that you're very, very intelligible on, you're up here, and the normal person can't really come down to you or can't come up to you. And so the job of the speaker, the writer, is to really come down to that person to convey an intelligent conversation to a normal person. So I think that's awesome. Have you found that doing that has been harder than you thought, easier than you thought, more challenging in for yourself, for other people? What do you think?
Well, it really comes down to people realizing that even though they are experts in their particular field, they weren't always experts. So they should have that empathy for the people that are in the audience that aren't necessarily at their level in terms of their expertise. Because we're not all experts at everything. So you could be in an audience where someone else is talking about their particular area of expertise. And if they're not communicating in such a way that you can understand, well, then you're in the position that others would be in when you're the one giving the presentation. So it's really about having that, as I mentioned, having that empathy for just not necessarily the people in the audience being at the level that you are, and as you mentioned, coming down to their level so that they're actually engaged in what you're listening to and or what they're listening to, and you essentially didn't waste your time and effort in putting a presentation together that no one's going to listen to.
So you said you're an engineer. did you start out doing that? And you said you want to push more people into the STEM fields. Do you think that STEM, because we're seeing a lot of the things with STEM today, especially with in the college in the academics, it's like, not that the numbers are falling, but it's kind of being stagnant. And I feel like STEM is something that more people are getting into, but it's slow. Do you think, you said STEM is the future? Elaborate on why you think that is.
Well, I mean, we're conversing over the internet right now, so I think that's proof positive that it's certainly the future. Everybody has an iPhone these days or a smartphone. People drive cars, people have iPads, people just have all kinds of technology around them, and so it's in. I think it's rather obvious that the innovation economy is the future. We're artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science. That's only going to become more pronounced as time goes on. And but one thing I do want to clarify is I'm not a proponent of pushing more people into STEM. I'm more of a proponent in having them consider STEM as an option, because I just want people to know that STEM is not off limits to them. Anyone can get into it if you have the interest and you're willing to do the work to excel at STEM. So that's one thing I really would want to make clear. I'm not actually a fan of when people talk about promoting or just encouraging more people to get into STEM, because I just want people to have that, know that it's an option, and if they don't choose the option, well, that's okay as well.
Yeah, and there is a thing too. It's like there's so many creative outlets, and like you said, like we're talking over the internet right now. There's a lot of things that kids growing up. I'm still young, that you can find yourself doing, especially in this time and age. And you know I'm sure you believe in school, higher education, and things like that. But I think we're seeing a time where higher education is not for everyone. You can make a high standard of living for yourself by not going to a higher education school. Do you agree? Do you think that higher education, we should be pushing more kids into higher education, not necessarily STEM, but just going to college to elaborate their mind, things like that? Or do you think that in this day and age, people don't have to necessarily go to college?
Oh, I'm definitely not a proponent of everybody should go to college. I think that's ridiculous. College is really expensive. So if you're going to go, you have to be really clear on what you're going to do and the outcomes you want from getting that degree. I'm definitely not the type to say that everybody should go to college to get a better life. I mean, I actually have a podcast myself, and one of the guests I had is a guy named Mike Roberts, and he runs the San Diego Code School. Essentially, he takes people with no coding, no tech background, and he trains them in essentially in tech, so that they can then be apprentices at these tech companies here in the San Diego area. So they're basically going through this boot camp, which I think is maybe a couple of months, if that, and then they train under more seasoned developers or more seasoned software engineers, and then eventually get hired on at these various companies. And because a lot of the times with these type of jobs, though, even if you get a computer science degree, the technology there, the programs that you're learning in school are obsolete by the time you're done. So you have to relearn or learn a bunch of different languages all over again when you start working. So what was the point of going through a 4-year degree and taking on that debt? So I'm a firm believer of people being able to learn outside of the college campus and still be successful.
Yeah, and something you said too, with computer science especially, it almost seems like, because of how fast like the technology is innovating, it almost seems like code is like the certain code that you learn in 4 years, like you said, is gone in the next 4 years. Or not even just that. Like, let's talk about the people who were born in the 90s or grew up without cell phones. Every kid today has an iPhone, like you said. Everybody has an iPhone. When I was growing up, when I was in like elementary school, middle school, I didn't have an iPhone until like probably eighth grade, and that's still young for a lot of people. And so I think especially from the '90s kids or even the '80s kids to now, there's a huge jump in how the technology is. And even today, like we're seeing how fast it's moving and how better we're getting. Everybody has a flat screen or a huge flat screen TV now. You like TVs are not as like you go when I was a kid, like we had the box TVs, like and kids today don't even know what that is. Everybody has a console, a game console. And it's almost like it's just going to keep getting better and better, and it's going to get harder and harder to learn, I think.
Oh yeah, no question, and so that's really, it's making the point that there may not be a point in going to school to going to college to get a degree that you don't necessarily use when you start working. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. They're just pushed to, once you finish high school, it's just the thing to do. You go to college, and if you don't go to college, then you're not living up to your potential. But not only that, but there's also trades. I mean, often there are so many trade jobs that are going unfilled because people think that the trades is beneath them. But you could actually make a pretty good living as a plumber or an electrician. So there's certainly other paths that people can take to become successful that don't involve college.
I don't know if they're a standard trade or if they're even considered trade, but things that I'm seeing a lot, specifically with women in this day and age. My girlfriend, for example, a lot of girls are going to esthetician school or nail schools or beauty schools and getting their license to do lashes, to do waxing, things like that, because every girl needs that. It's like almost a priority to have lashes if you're in the 20s, maybe early 30s. Late teens. And I don't know if that's considered a trade, if it is, if it isn't, but it is definitely something that is booming right now. And even for men, barber school. I know a person specifically. I don't even know if he's gone to barber school yet, but he does barber, and he's like growing his himself in his own personal business using social media. So like we said, there's a lot of trades you can do, and if you have social media behind you, you could have the best plumbing company in the world. And if you're a good plumber, you don't even have to do the plumbing. You can own the company, And so I don't like we're saying, I'm a big proponent of not everyone has to go to school. I'm going to school because I'm going to get my attorney's license because I want to practice law and I want to do other things, but that's something you need to go to school for. And I'm always a big proponent of if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be in the STEM fields, if you want to be a professor, if you want to teach, things like that, you have to go to school for that. But if you have something that you are so passionate about, we have social media, and that's almost like you can listen to countless podcasts. You can go to countless online courses. You don't necessarily need school.
I firmly agree. And what one thing that really needs to change though is that other people need to get over their biases against people that don't have college degrees. I mentioned people that go to these boot camps and then get jobs at these tech companies without having degrees. Well, that's that seems to be happening at the bigger companies like Google and Facebook, but at smaller tech companies they still seem to want to discriminate against those that went to the coding boot camps and don't want to give them jobs. They prefer to give those jobs to people with computer science degrees. So really people getting over their biases of people with degrees over those that perhaps went to the coding boot camps or are self-taught, that needs to happen as well.
I feel like getting over biases is something that just has to happen in general for the human species. Biases is something that we are seeing plague all of us. That's something that always ekes me the wrong way. So one thing that I was thinking about, so I don't give you a little background since we didn't really have a long discussion before this. Told you I'm pre-law, but I'm a political science and philosophy double major. I think I might have switched to a philosophy minor. So that's the kind of thinking I do, not necessarily science, but it's more like the society science kind of thing. I don't really know if there's a science of society. We can get into that, but and so shoot, what was I we're going with this? But and so one of the things that I found with shoot, where was I going with this? I don't remember. What were we talking about right before this? Schooling.
Yeah. And then the biases that some
Oh
people
yeah, okay, yeah. And one of the things I found is like when societies start to degenerate, it's the biases that are behind other people against other people, whether it be on the counts of race, on accounts of IQ, on accounts of gender. When the biases on the biases of you versus them kind of come into play, that's when it starts to degenerate. And like you say, it happens in the workplace all the time, and it really happens specifically when people think they're smarter than others. I've found. Have you found that when people are condescending or even arrogant in a sense, but they are smart and they have a lot of background in the workplace, they seem to have a bias against other people, especially when they don't have the Yale degree or the high sophisticated degree that they have, or they didn't go to the same undergrad, or they didn't go to the same graduate programs or got the same courses. Have you found that to be the case?
unfortunately, yeah, that could certainly be the case at companies. And if that is, well, then you have a choice to make whether you continue on at that company or you go somewhere else where those biases don't exist, or at least aren't affecting you to the point where perhaps you don't get a job there, or it makes your job difficult to do if you do have a job there.
Yeah. So back to you, man. Back to what you do with Teach the Geek. What is the most interesting thing or the most important thing that you have found doing that?
Well, it's really getting people to understand that their technical expertise is, having that technical expertise is great, but if you're not able to convey it to non-technical people, many of whom are decision makers, their technical expertise will go for nothing. Those ideas that you have, they won't ever get implemented. Because so it's really important to be able to communicate to these decision makers, and to do that, you need to, as you mentioned earlier, get down to their level so that they'll actually listen to what you have to say.
And so, how or what have you found to be the number one skill that people need to learn to be able to do that, to be able to convey the right message, to be able to speak more correctly to their audience?
It's knowing your audience. It's getting the sense of where they're at so that you can meet them there. I mean, when working in medical devices as an engineer, if I'm talking to other product development engineers like I was, I'm going to speak to them differently than I'm going to the salespeople who are typically non-technical. And one thing I would like to say is, when I used to have to give these presentations in front of senior management, one way I used to make sure that I was addressing them in a way that was appropriate, at their level, was I would go to their administrative assistants. Oftentimes, these people are really busy, so they wouldn't have time to meet with me. But I could go to their admin and ask them, what kind of information would I need to put into this presentation to keep them interested, for them to listen to what I have to say. I mean, a lot of times, if I was talking to the VP of R&D, they want to know more about the actual innovation, the research that was being done. But if you're talking to the CEO, he wants to know how that innovation and that technology is going to affect the long-term strategy of the company. So making sure that that information was conveyed in a presentation is really important to make sure that they stay engaged and listen.
Yeah, and I think, the day and age we're living in, engagement is everything. Eyeballs is everything. If you can get people engaged on I was talking about earlier, your social media platform, your podcast, there you're automatically winning, and that is a skill and that is a tool. And so for you to understand that in person, I think it definitely does translate over to the social media worlds. But a question I have regarding those two: do you find it more difficult to engage with an audience in person or through social media?
Well, I think it's easier to engage with people in person because you can actually see them, and you can see their nonverbal communication, their verbal communication. You can pick up on cues more easily than on social media because you have no clue who's consuming your social media. So it's a bit more difficult, I would say.
Yeah, social media is a weird one too. Did you ever see it was a documentary on Netflix, Social Dilemma? Did you ever get a chance to watch that?
No, I did not.
So it's basically talking about how social media, how they run the algorithms, and how it's so dangerous because of how they target you and they keep you locked in. Like, it keeps you engaged and it keeps your dopamine centers. It's almost like a slot machine. And that is one thing that I will say, getting all this innovation that we were talking about and how fast it's going. We're moving people away from, and especially since COVID hit, we're moving people away from interactions with actual human beings and moving them onto these square boxes. Now, this is better than nothing. Me and you having a one-on-one conversation where I can see your face, it's better than nothing. But better than everything would be us sitting across from a table, because you can feel the energy, and that's something you can't get um, with being online. I don't know if you feel that way. I know you're probably very technical, you're very scientific, but I feel like, especially with positive people, you can feel the energy coming off them and you feel the conversation. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I certainly understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. It is easier to feel people's energy when they're across from you, when you can actually see them in person, as opposed to over the internet, or on social media.
Do you feel that energy and other people's energy is one of the ways that you have found to get people to engage with their audiences better, and how to convey messages better, is to get them engaged and get the energy up?
Oh, yeah, certainly. And another way I think is helpful in getting people engaged in whatever presentation you're giving is to use stories. When I was a child, and perhaps when people were children, when your mother or father read you a bedtime story, it was always a treat. But for some reason, as we get older, we tend to move away from using stories to convey information. And perhaps there are even people that think that for more technical presentations that like what engineers or scientists would have to give, stories are inappropriate, but they're still a very useful tool in getting people engaged and listening to what you have to say. Just being able to couch your data or your technical expertise in the body of a story.
And that is something that I've talked to countless people on the show and countless people in person. I don't know if you can tell I'm very talkative, but talking to a historian, we were having this conversation about humans are storytellers. Everything that we know is stories, music, stories, everything creative, basically. Movie stories, music stories. The way we basically create everything was they're all stories. You can chop it up to whether or not you're religious or not. The Bible is a compilation of stories. You know, we can tell truthful stories, we can tell not so truthful stories, but they all have this profound meaning on what it means to be a human, you know. And so for you to connect the story realm with the business realm, it brings us back to, okay, we still are human and we still are these conscious beings that are in these meat sacks, you know. And so like we really need to connect with others, to whether you want to sell something or just like live a healthy, better mental life, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, all a story really is information being conveyed in such a way that there's a clear beginning, middle, and end. So essentially, something happened. There were some things that happened in the middle, and then there was some sort of outcome. With the presentations that I had to give in front of management, what was really important was to also convey a call to action. So if there was something that we needed from the senior management in terms of either resources, for more money for the project, more time for the project, more people to work on the project, that needed to be conveyed very clearly during the presentation so that the senior management would know what was needed and what needed to be done.
For sure. You know, one thing that I believe, like you said, a call to action. That's like the one thing that they teach you when scholarly writing. You know, it's like you need a call to action. What's your call to action? I feel like the call to action specifically in speaking and writing, that's the place where creativity lies in scholarly work or in intelligible work and just work in general. It's that call to action because it's your almost, or maybe it's not just your idea, but it's the business's ideas, it's your group's ideas, but that's where it lays, and that's where you bring your own creativity into the business realm. Because people forget, man, people like to say like, all right, you know, you work a 9 to 5, you're in a cubicle, life's not that creative. Dude, you can make creativity out of anything, and I hate that. I hate it when people say that they can't be creative in what they're doing. And if you feel like you can't, do something else, but you can be creative in anything. Do you agree?
Oh, for sure. Perhaps people might even have that misconception about working in STEM that it's all, everything is technically based. And yes, there's a lot of technical expertise that's involved in being an engineer or a scientist, but there's quite a bit of creativity to it as well. I mean, if you think of all these inventions that are out here that were created by, with the help of scientists and engineers, there is some sort of creativity involved with it. I mean, it shouldn't just we were taking into consideration just the technical requirements, but people are also have this creative side to them. So that's something that we need to take into account when developing these products as well.
So being an engineer, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk and his whole Tesla business, SpaceX, things like that?
Oh, I think it's cool. I mean, I'm not too versed on Elon Musk and Tesla per se, but because I worked in medical devices, more specifically spinal implants. But I really like his ambitious nature and just seeing that there are no barriers, and he's trying to push things as far as he can go in terms of innovation.
Okay, you said spinal implants. Let's backtrack. Let's Can you just give me and the audience a little bit of a, because you touched on what you did before Teach the Geek and things like that, but what you were got your degree in or what you were practicing as an engineer before. You said spinal implants. Can you just elaborate on what that is?
Oh, sure. So I got a degree in materials engineering, my bachelor's degree, and then I also got a master's degree in biomedical engineering. And actually, quite a number of people, once they get that degree in biomedical engineering, go into medical devices. And I just happened to go into spinal implants and instrumentation. So essentially, one instance of a spinal implant is, let's say you have a bulging disc. A orthopedic surgeon will go into your back and remove it, and they'll replace it with an implant. And oftentimes that implant can be a metal, it can be a ceramic, or it could actually be made out of cadaver bone. So I worked at a couple of companies where I was developing implants made out of cadaver bone. So if you're an organ donor, your bones could be donated to these tissue banks, and we go to the tissue banks to get the bone to then develop the implants out of them.
That is fascinating. That's organ transplants and being a donor, organ donor has been something that has fascinated me for so long. Like the fact that humans can live with other humans' parts in them is fascinating. Like one of the things that I know is like they're starting to use cadaver Achilles on ACL surgeries, and they're working better than usual because they're thicker or they're stronger, and that's so fascinating that you worked on cadaver bone. So was the bone specifically from a cadaver spine, or was it from other just random bone parts? What was that cadaver bone from?
Yeah, typically it would be from the spine of a cadaver. Although in some instances we could take bone from other parts of the body to use as implants as well. So I mentioned the implant that would be replacing an intervertebral disc, but in some instances we would also take granular bone from other parts of the. We take bone from other parts of the body and essentially make them granules, and we use that to stuff into various parts of the spine also, so that bone would grow there. You're meant as you mentioned, it is rather interesting stuff.
No, yeah. Is there anything being worked? I know you're out of that now, right? You're not in medical implants anymore.
No, not anymore.
But do you know anything that if there's been any studies or anything done about those medical implants and being for paraplegics and people to be able to walk again?
Well, yeah, that's a little more complex because with paraplegics, the issues they have isn't necessarily with the bone, but it's with the nerves. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of research that's being done, and another thing about nerves is that they don't regenerate once they're done. Once they're gone, they're gone. And so a lot of research is being done into trying to help with some sort of regeneration of these nerves, and a lot of that work has to do with stem cells, adult stem cells, embryonic
Mhm.
stem cells, to essentially implant into those areas so that those nerves regenerate again. It's again very interesting work.
Yeah, and one thing that I talk about with a lot of people on this show is Neuralinks looking to do that for Alzheimer's, right? It's looking to create or to stop the degeneration of neurons in the brain for patients of Alzheimer's, patients of alcohol abuse, patients of who have degenerated their brains. I think that if Neuralink works, it could be used in spinal injuries to help people walk again. Because, like you said, the problem is not that they don't have their legs anymore. The problem is that they can't use them because of the nerves. And so, if we can get those nerves firing again, I feel like that's when you get people walking again. The whole thing is what happens when you merge. Being a scientist, what you think happens when you merge bio, bio, biological tissue like neurons with mechanical AI things like artificial nerves.
Yeah, so I mean, all that type of research is current. It's being done now, and we're getting closer to there being some sort of solution. But I mean, as you mentioned, when it comes to nerves, once they start to degenerate, we don't really know how to stop that process or to reverse the process. But as I mentioned, there's work being done now to try to figure that out.
Yeah, so let's talk about your children's book for a little bit, man. Just go ahead and I mean, you brought it up a little bit, the background of it, but just talk a little bit more about your children's book, what it is, what's the story behind it, and everything like that.
Oh yeah, so the book as I mentioned is about my nephew, and he's asking me why his hair is the way it is, and I use science to answer the question. So there are a lot of books out there that talk about hair, but they don't talk about it from the sense of why it is the way it is. It's more of loving your hair as it is. So it's more of a, I guess what's the best way to describe it? More of a self-esteem type of thing. But with mine, is I want to take more of a scientific bent to it because I want to essentially take everyday topics and explain them in more of a scientific way. And the first idea I came up with was hair because I actually didn't know why his hair is the way it is. So I had to do a little bit of research. And essentially, the book is geared towards children second to third grade. And I presented the book for that age range because I wanted the kids at a young age to know that there are no careers that are off limits to them. So even if there are naysayers that tell them they can't go into STEM later on in life, if they know early on this is something that I can do, they're more likely to ignore those naysayers.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And that is a little bit of a self-esteem book to an extent. It's pushing kids, or not even pushing kids, but it's like lifting them up to make sure that they have that like internal defense mechanism against naysayers, like you said. Something I thought about when you were talking about that was, you know, a lot of the talk these days is about what you should be telling your children and what you should not be telling. One thing is that book is awesome. Anyone should listen to that. But that second thing is, you know, that's like the number one way, because we talked about this earlier. You want to like not dumb down your intelligence speak, but you want to bring the level down to where lay people can listen. If you can get second and third graders to listen and to be interested in that, that's like the ultimate goal, because kids are like the ADDest of all ADD patients. They're all jittery and stuff, but they don't even know what they want to do. And I firmly believe one of the reasons that I studied government was because of two teachers that I had, one in eighth grade and one in senior high school. I'm a smart guy and everything like that, but school never got me that way. But those two teachers grabbed me and they pulled me in, and I firmly believe that interests have to do with the way that you're learned, that you learn something, and the way that you learn something has to do with the person teaching you, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the what I said earlier about knowing your audience. So if you're able to do that type of, I guess, I don't want to call it research, but I guess like reconnaissance to know what's going to grab those students, they're way more likely to listen to what you have to say and maybe even enact the things that you're even talking about, while they're studying and while you're teaching.
Definitely, man. So where did you get the name Teach the Geek?
I actually didn't come up with the name. It actually had another name. It was called "We Can All Be Great Speakers." It's actually a woman that I was talking to when I was telling her essentially what it was, and she's the one that came up with the name Teach the Geek. And I thought, oh wow, that has a really nice ring to it. So I changed the name.
Yeah, Teach the Geek I like the backdrop behind you too, man. I only got this little sign that says Calling a Man's podcast. Um,
Oh yeah, this backdrop was actually not even my idea as well. Man, I take ideas from a lot of people, but there was a woman that I was working with in consulting when I first developed Teach the Geek. I worked as an engineer. I didn't know anything about marketing and sales, so I hired this consultant to essentially help me in branding and just positioning Teach the Geek in such a way that people would be interested in it. And for my podcast, which I also release on YouTube, so there's a visual component to it. She's the one suggested that I get this backdrop, and so I did.
yeah, man, that's awesome. But right now, specifically right now in your life, what is interesting you to the point where, like, what is driving you? What are you really focused on working on right now?
Well, it will be the second and third book of the children's book series. So I didn't mention this, but I plan on making the book into a series of books in which my nephew is asking me a question and I use science to answer it. So I'm really excited about that. And then also developing other courses under the Teach the Geek banner. Teach the Geek to Speak is the course on public speaking, but there are a whole other skills that engineers and scientists don't necessarily learn in school that are imperative or that are critical in moving up within an organization or just building on one's career, networking, interviewing, just a lot of soft skills that we don't necessarily get while we're in school.
What are some skills you can give us right now on the air about interviewing that you know of?
Well, one big thing when it comes to interviewing is doing your research beforehand. Don't go into those interviews cold, and also having questions to ask the interviewer once they're done asking their questions, because it shows interest that you have in the company. But it also shows that isn't just a one-way street, that they're getting you're trying to get the job, but you're trying to get information as to why you would want to work at the company as well.
That's actually fascinating. It's not a one-way street, because nothing's a one-way street, and you add value to a company if you're going to go work there, or you're going to do anything, just as much as they're giving you value by giving you a job. That is a good way to put it, because nothing is a one-way street. I think that's one thing I can say for everyone listening is, like, if you feel like you're down in the dumps and you're depressed or you're down, remember that you add value to people's lives, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you're doing. You are in a network of a society where innovation of technology is booming, and one post, you make one post and it could reach millions upon millions of people and influence billions, right? And so if you're down, remember that your life has more meaning to it than you think it does, and that positivity is the better light for the world. I'm a big proponent of positivity, big proponent of learning, big proponent of good energy.
Oh, you know what? I fully agree with you. And one other thing I would like to mention about that is, especially because of COVID, a lot of people were furloughed or even lost their jobs. And because of that, whenever now they're going on interviews, they realize that there are a lot of people out there that are out of work, so they perhaps are in competition with a number of people for those jobs. And so they go into those interviews thinking, I need to do my best, or it's all about me impressing this company so that they hire me so I can get out of that pool of unemployed people. But you still have to understand that once you start working at this company, it has to be one that you want to stick with, because you have to go there every day. So with or without a pandemic, it's important to still realize that it is a two-way street. The company needs to provide information to you as to why you would be, or why you would want to work for the company as well.
For sure. And like you said, COVID did hit hard, but also like I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of other things that you can do, because I've found that if you're really interested in something, you can build a skill and be really good at it. If you're not really interested in something, you're going to slack off and not be that good. And you're just going to work waiting for the weekends. If you're working 9 to 5, or not even necessarily, you could be working a 9 to 5 and love it. But if you're working a job that you hate going to and you look forward to the weekends, try to find something that you're like interested in, and go see if you can score an interview. Go see if you can talk to someone that works there. Go see if you can intern if you have any free time. Go see if you can just listen. Go see if you can take a course on it. There's so many things that we can do nowadays through technology, like we were talking about earlier, that we couldn't do, or human society couldn't do even 50 years ago, even 25 years ago. And so if you feel like you're not where you want to be, go somewhere else. That's my advice.
Oh, no question. And to be more succinct in what I was talking about before, yes, you want to convince the company that you're the best candidate, but the company also needs to convince you that they're the best company.
Yes, you always want to walk in feeling confident that, and you always want to be interviewed by a bunch of different things. So I work in an attorney's office right now. I'm a law clerk, an undergrad law clerk, and one of the things they always say is, you know, go talk to other law firms too. Like, don't just talk to us. You want to have your options. Like, cases aren't specifically perfect for one firm or the other. You'll find your match wherever you want to meet, and I think people can take that into their lives and realize that you know it's not about like that one specific one that you want. It's about finding the best fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people feel stuck at whatever company that they're at, but they've never been stuck. You always have a choice. And so many people just think they don't have a choice. It's just, this is the company that I'm at and that's it. But you always have a choice. You stay there and stay unhappy or disgruntled at where you're at, or you make a move and you go somewhere else, or maybe you even start your own business, but you always have a choice.
So I mean, you started up three different things. You wrote a children's book. You started up Teach the Geek. I'm sure there was tough times that you went through doing those. What is one way that you got yourself through the hard times of starting up companies, starting up, writing a children's book, writing a series? How do you get yourself through challenging when you're your own boss, kind of, in a sense?
Well, it really it starts with me deciding that this is what I wanted to do, so I'm going to see it through. I mean, this isn't like when you're working at a company and you're given something to do by the company and you do it because you're given something to do by the company. This is fully uh, when it comes to the businesses that I'm running. It's all self driven. I started them because I wanted to do them, and so it would make very little sense for me not to have that motivation to see them through and to be successful with them. So that's what I'd have to say about moving forward with the companies. And yeah, you're right. There's certainly been some low points, but what's really kept me going is knowing that I started this. I want to see it through, and I think it could be successful.
So I get into a point. I don't know if you're ever. Do you ever have you ever delved into philosophy? Neil?
No, I can't say I have.
Well, have you ever thought deeply about things?
Yeah, yeah, well, now that you mention it, yeah, I certainly do. I like to think deeply about things. I like to be introspective. I just never really thought of myself as a philosopher.
What is something that you think deeply? What keeps you up at night when you're in bed?
Hmm.
Random thoughts.
Well, probably the best way to go about moving forward with any of the businesses. So that's certainly what keeps me up at night. Well, something I think about anyway. I sleep really well, but what I really think about is
That's good.
how to move forward with the businesses that I'm doing, because I mentioned I was an engineer for a number of years working in product development. I've never ran businesses before, so there's a lot that I don't know. So really what's been really helpful to me is seeking out those people that do know, and paying them whatever they're charging to get that knowledge so I can move more quickly, as opposed to trying to figure it out on my own, which takes more time. Because you're going to pay either by time or money. You got to pick one.
Yeah, no, and I feel like a lot of people don't take into account the first one, time. That's a I think about time all the time, I think about time all the time. What am I, a rapper? But time, like you said, people always worry about their money. I have to keep this money, right? But they don't think about their time. Time's the one thing you can't make any more time. You can't make any more time. You can always make more money, but you can never make more time. And at the end of your road, right, when you're laying in bed, right, and you're dying, you're an old man, hopefully, you're not going to be thinking about mowing the lawn or petting the dog. Well, maybe petting the dog or feeding the dog or going to work the next day. You're going to be thinking about your life. You're going to be thinking about your loved ones, maybe petting your dog. I go back. I take that back. You might pet your dog, but you're going to be thinking about the things that really matter to you. And one of those things is time. Did you spend your time in the right way? And I think if you can say that, if you can get up every morning, this is actually something Steve Jobs said. If you can get up in the morning and look at yourself in the eye and say, I'm going to die, and still go do that thing, and you still want to do that thing you're going to do next, go to work, go to school, things like that, then you're doing what you need to do.
Absolutely. And I can say personally for myself, I will not be thinking about petting my dog, as I don't have one.
Well, get a dog and pet him. That's fine. But are you a dog person, cat person?
It's very interesting. So I mentioned one of the things that I do is a patent agent. So one of the clients that we work with the firm developed an invention that's a leash attachment for dogs. So to support the inventor, I actually bought one. So I have it, but I'm never going to use it since I don't have a dog.
Why don't you have a dog? Did you ever think about getting a dog?
Not really. I mean, when I was a kid, I was bit by a dog when I was 16. So
Hmm.
I'm kind of leery of dogs now.
Yeah, I do get that. I love dogs though. I'm a big dog person. They just make you smile, man. They light up your world just like some people can. Some people can light up your life, and I feel like animals are one thing that do that. Um, are you a big nature person? Like, do you go on walks, you go on hikes?
Not particularly, but I'm not opposed to nature.
Well, you live
Nature's
in
good.
San Diego, so you probably go to the beach a lot, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I go to the beach every now and then. Living in San Diego is really nice because the weather is essentially great all year round. I don't have to deal with snow, which I very much appreciate.
Where did you say you grew up? Did you say you grew up somewhere else?
Oh yeah, so I've been in California for about 14 years now, but I'm originally from Canada. I'm from a city called Brampton. It's a suburb of Toronto, so I know snow really well.
Yeah, it snows a lot there. So right now I'm in Vegas. This is where I grew up. But I go to school in right outside of Portland, Oregon. So we get snow about 2, 3 times a year, and sometimes a lot. Like this year we got a lot of snow. And I like it because I never got to experience it, but I could imagine like experiencing snow for like a long time of your life. You would want to get out of it because I wouldn't want to stay there and have snow all winter.
Oh yeah, because with snow comes cold, and I'm not a big fan of cold either.
I don't think anybody's a fan of being cold, but I will say, would you rather? Here's a question: would you rather be extremely cold or extremely hot, like outside wise?
Probably extremely hot because you could always take off. Well, maybe extremely cold. No, I'm not picking either. I need the medium. I need the happy medium.
I'm not picking either. Yeah, because here's my dilemma with it. I live in Vegas, so it gets to like 120 sometimes. But if you could always jump in a pool, but then that then you're wet, and then it's like whatever. And when it's cold, you can always put on levels, yeah. But you get hot, and so it's like there's never you want to be inside basically, even if it's really hot or really cold. You want to be inside.
Yes, you want to be inside with some climate control, either some heating or some AC.
Are you a prolific dreamer, Neil?
Prolific dreamer.
Like, do you dream a lot? Not like dream like as in like I have a dream, but like as in like sleep wise. Like, do you dream a lot when you go to sleep?
I do actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I have found that like more creative or the more people think they have a lot of dreams. And being a scientist, what do you think dreams are? Where do you think they come from? Do you think they're just processing of what your day was? Do you think they're a way for your conscious mind to communicate with your unconscious mind? What do you think it is?
Man, I hope not, because I have some pretty messed up dreams sometimes. So, so hopefully that's not the case. But yeah, I'm not. Well, you mentioned philosophy and deep thought. I never really thought that deeply as to what dreams are.
I think about these things all. I'll give you an example before I go back to dreams. 2 nights ago, maybe 3 nights ago, it happens to me all the time. I had a dream, and I was like seeing my family, the way my family was gonna die, and then I got to me, and I woke up. Why did I have that dream? It's a fucked up dream. Sorry, excuse my French, but that's a bad dream. And then I sat there and I thought about like processing nothingness. Like if I would say I'm religious, so I believe in heaven and everything like that. But I was processing if there wasn't a heaven at the end of life, what does eternal nothingness look like for a human being? Because unfortunately, my friend, I don't know if you ever heard of the Vegas shooting in 2017.
Yeah, I
My
remember that.
friend passed away in it, and I was thinking about him, and I was like, what if he's not anywhere? What does this time feel like for him? Like going back to time. And I sat there and I couldn't get out of my head thinking about eternal nothingness for 2 hours. And I think about these all the time. And like, not just death for instance, but like just like deep, really deep thoughts. Like I have them and I toss and turn about them all the time. And going to dreams, it's like dreams are one of those things that like, I feel like sometimes your unconscious mind is trying to talk to you. Sometimes it's just internal wiring, but I feel like they need to have some meaning because evolutionarily speaking, why would we evolve with dreams unless they had some evolutionary benefit for us?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a very interesting conversation, and hopefully the answer isn't well. We have these dreams for nothing. But I guess when it comes to the eternal nothingness that perhaps exists at the end of life, it makes it even more important that you live your life to the fullest as you're here, because we don't really know what's coming once we're not here.
Yeah, and it's just we don't really know what infinite looks like. Nobody can really because we can't fathom that with our little human brains. Like infinite is so large, and the universe and the magnitude of the universe and the infinite worlds theories and then just to think like there might be one time where there's an infinite amount of nothingness because we can't imagine that because like for there to be nothing there had to have been something on the other side. It's a paradox. And so if then we are something right now and they aren't something then where it's fat it's you see why I stay up at night. I can't get through them. I like talking to people about them. And so I feel like I have a lot of theories of what consciousness is, but one of them is that we're kind of wired, tuned into these beings, and that we get wired somewhere else. But like you said, regardless of any of that, what it means to you is that you should live your life to the best of your ability and never feel grateful for the time you've had and the time you get to have going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And for there to be nothing, there had to have been something. This is why you're the philosopher, and perhaps why I don't see myself as one.
Yeah, dude. I don't know if I see myself as a philosopher, but that's just how I think, and it's the way that organizes my mind. Yeah, I feel like I'm also a very logical thinker, and so that's why it gets me so much because to life is not logical. We make it logical, but it's not logical. We are sitting across on squares, looking at each other through eyeballs and thinking and then speaking it and making noises and having each other understand it. And then I'm going to post it and people are going to understand it. That makes no sense. We make it make sense because we experience it. But let's just say one day we start doing this, and we understood that. We can't make sense. A lot of this is a big philosophy thing too. Is a lot of what we experience is we experience it like if you flip a coin 100 times, it's not going to turn into a butterfly. You know that it's just going to flip. It's going to be heads or tails. But now, if it did turn into a butterfly, you'd shit yourself because that's not how life works. And so, a lot of what we experience on day-to-day lives is not very logical, but we make it rational because we experience it on a day-to-day basis.
You know, for someone who doesn't see himself as a philosopher, you sure do sound like one. I don't necessarily even think that deeply about various things in the world, but this has been really interesting to I guess really digest them more.
But being a scientist, what do you think deeply on, or what did you think deeply on being an engineer? What was one thing that you thought about so much when you were working on the cadavers, things like that?
I mean, really, it was just getting these projects done. I'm not sure working as an engineer that I thought too deeply about anything. It's just this is my job. I never really thought that my job defined me. I was just I'm an engineer because that's what I went to school for. It's the job that I was hired to do. So it's really just doing the job to the best of my ability. I'm not sure I really gave all that much deep thought into the job itself. It was just more into making sure that the job got done.
I get that. Yeah, and not letting the job define you is a big thing that people I don't think let themselves do a lot. I feel like especially if you're successful in something that you do, you're almost feel like you're attached to the job. And that's not the case. People are separate. You can do many things, not just work your job, I feel like.
Oh, no question. And if anything, that hopefully that is a lesson that a lot of people learned from this pandemic once they got furloughed or lost their jobs. It is as if they lost their identities. Like this is what I was. This is what I am. If I'm not working this job, then what am I? But you had inherent value regardless of whether you had that job or not.
That's a good thing to say to people. Everyone has inherent value. All right, man. What else interests you, man? I mean, like, not all right, man, but like, what is the most interesting thing to you at this moment? Like you said, it's working on things, but what have you been like found that's new in your life that you've been interested in?
Well, working as a patent agent has been really interesting in that or I get to learn about other people's technologies all the time. So, really learning their technologies in such a way that I could write about them to convince a patent examiner to allow the patent application to issue as a patent has been really cool. I really enjoy that part of the job. It's getting access to essentially to people's brains and how and their innovation and why they came up with what they came up with and how it's going to affect society and benefit us all has been really interesting. That's something that I really am keen on continuing to do. I mean, being a patent agent is just it's a fun job.
What is one or two people and their inventions that you talked to that were the most fascinating to you?
Well, I really enjoyed that dog leash attachment that I've been working on, because at least with this particular invention, one of the issues I guess a lot of dog walkers have is being able to obviously control the animal, but also provide them with water, and to be able to do it in one contraption has been kind of, I guess, would be ideal as opposed to carrying something to hold the liquid and then the leash attachment. So essentially, this person that developed this invention combined the two of them so that you can feed or give the animal drink while also still controlling them with the leash attachment. So that's been really cool to work on. And then another invention that I worked on was for a former NFL player. He developed what would you call it? It was essentially an invention where you put it into the ground and it has a tape measure that's attached to it as well. So you can pull it out into various configurations so that football players can run different routes. So that's been really interesting to work on as well.
That is fascinating. Yeah. Being a football player myself, that's really cool. Like I can't even imagine what it's like to be a patent agent because like you said, it's like diving into people's minds and why they are doing this and why it's and you can see the fire in their eyes too, I'm sure. Like you can see them being so interested and so charismatic about what they want to bring to the world. It's that I can't even imagine how fascinating that is.
Yeah, it's certainly you definitely see the fire in their eyes. But I mentioned that the firm was virtual, so you see the fire in their eyes on the computer screen.
Well, man, this was a great conversation. Is there any other things you want to give to my audience, like who you are, or just like some knowledge from you?
Let's see, any knowledge? Well, I mean, I mentioned earlier that we all have this, we all have inherent value. So don't place a job above who you are as a person. Your job doesn't define you. And I also, I believe I mentioned this earlier too, that you always have choices. You're not stuck anywhere. You always have the choice to either stay there or leave and do something else. But the choice is up to you. I mean, thank you for having me on your podcast. And if everyone wants to learn more about me, they can go to teachthegeek.com to learn more about the work I do with engineers and scientists about their public speaking. And then I mentioned earlier, I also have a YouTube channel where I talk to engineers and scientists about public speaking. Really, a secondary goal of the channel, which I didn't even envision when I first put it together, was the career journeys of these people. Just because you start off somewhere doesn't mean that that's where you have to stay. I mean, I did mention it earlier. You're never stuck. You always have the choice to do something different. So just learning about people's journeys and what they did with their degrees has been really fascinating. So you can learn more about the channel or check out the interviews at youtube.teachthegeek.com. And also about, I guess, about the book, the Ask Uncle Neil, Why is My Hair Curly? If you care to learn more about that, that's askuncleneil.com.
Again, man, thanks for coming on. It was great to talk to you and great to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me.